Welcome back yet again to another episode of the pod. We got a four-way going on this, and we haven't had a four-way in a long time.
It's been too long. I've missed it.
For too long. We like these four-ways. We like what it does to Luke's face whenever I say four-way. We got Luke here with us today. We got Anthony also too from the team. Anthony, what's going on? And Ray, as always. Boys, this is an interesting one because you jump onto DTC Twitter and there are it's like media buying structures and CBO, ABO, consolidation, go broad, fuck your mother if you do any of those things, and like just really opinionated hot take type of stuff, which is always fun for a conversation. That's why we're all here in the room today. Where should we start? What's maybe we can start here. What's some like funny or crazy shit that you see getting like just put out there that you look on Twitter and you're like, what the hell is this nonsense?
I love the fact that media buying is dead. Like that's the trope, isn't it? Like media buying is dead.
How long has media buying been dead for? It's been like dead and revived. Yeah.
Yeah, but like people for something that's dead, people argue about it a lot, like people have a lot of opinions and a lot of about something that's dead. And so you need to spend 2 minutes in your account a year. So but like why do we have to argue about it? If that's the case, like, why are we arguing so much about this? Like, and it's been cool. It's like the cool thing is to spend as little time on your ad account as possible. Like, yeah, I spend like 30 seconds a decade in my account. And, if you spend any more time, then you're doing something wrong,
You're an idiot. You must be an idiot.
You're an idiot. Yeah, you've got
buy my course.
Like, yeah. Well, that's the thing, isn't it? That's the problem. That's the problem we got. Because if you want to sell something, you've got to have you've got to stand out in the market. And so if you're a guru, you've got to have some sort of mechanism. It's just like breakthrough advertising. You need like some sort of new mechanism. Then there's the embellishment. And so we're at that stage. And I think media buying did was like stage 5 market sophistication. And so now we're on like, I don't know. It's just,
well, now you're on dyeing your hair, putting eye patches on. Like it's going really far out there.
You can't sell anything by saying it depends. like join my course. It's like the it depends course. Like that won't sell any courses. Or like, hey, it's kind of complicated and nuanced. Yeah, like,
that's fair. Like because the reality is it doesn't sell courses, right? Like to answer everything with it depends, or like, oh, it's unique to your case, but it does really, really poorly. You do need to take a stance, as spicy as might be, to get the eyeballs and get the clicks and all that. I can't wait for I can't wait for like the Tim Ferriss 3.0 of media buying. So instead of like the 4-hour work week, it's like the 4-second day or something like that. It's like, you need like 12G internet and for it to be able to load up in half
4-second AI work week.
That's 4 seconds. Exactly.
Manifestation. You spend your whole 8 hours a day just manifesting. The last 12 seconds AI does it.
Yeah. And then the 5.0 is you now don't have a job anymore work week because AI just did everything and now you no longer have a job. Media buying is dead, and guess what? Your job is dead too. Oh my God, the robots are coming. Why do you think it's moved that way, and what do you think everyone is wrestling with? Like, why is media buying dead? What did media buying become? Why did it become such a trope, do you guys think?
I think it's because things have got simpler. Like there are less hacks, because the hacks used to work back in the day. Like you could have a significant difference in performance by the way that you did actually approach the way that you media bought. I still think that is the case, but there's less moving parts now. But like their targeting was much more prevalent, and you could have drastically different results. You probably couldn't run broad back in the day without things going terribly. And so things naturally have got simpler. And so I think that's probably where the media buying is dead thing came along. Like media buying is dead relative to what it used to be, where, you very much were the master of your own destiny in terms of how you approached media buying. and now you obviously have to give a lot more control over. So I think, and then obviously the move towards other things are more important. Like suddenly everyone realized that creative and offer, landing page, messaging, positioning are now the thing that have replaced media buying. Although those things always existed in the first place, So
yeah. And when that it's funny, as you were talking, I was thinking back to like all the setbacks that I guess in the political sphere that came to that came to the world that we lived in. So I think first it was Cambridge Analytica, right, and all the poke data that was like available for us back then when we were running ads, and then that got yanked, and like don't have that as a default in the system anymore. And then fast forward to iOS 14, that also was a setback here. But it seems like the setbacks were the things that pushed the tech along in a lot of ways to make it simpler. As those changes were happening, I remember the big discomfort for everyone was like, oh my God, we lost all these targeting options. Back then we were able to overlay a lot of stuff. What kind of discomfort of that kind of like losing control did it happen to you guys? What was the feeling like as it's like, man, I don't have control over this anymore. I don't have control over that anymore. I've got to trust the machine. Did you like, either the brands that you guys worked with or yourselves going through the ad account or thinking through the media buying, was there stuff there that made it feel like this ain't right?
I think the removal of interest has kind of been a phased out thing. So like it has been just over time, there's been a reduction in the amount of options for targeting as time. It hasn't been like, it didn't sort of like drop off a cliff, I don't feel. So I think the biggest thing was probably with iOS 14 when we lost a lot of access to reporting. That was probably the biggest thing.
And signal too. Like not only just
a lot of
reporting, but the signals.
Yeah. And that's still happening too.
Yeah. And so I think that was probably the biggest challenge because we really did have to look off platform a lot more to judge our performance. And I think, rightly or wrongly, up until that point, you could we were relying a lot more on in-platform metrics to make decisions and to judge our performance. And so I think it was a good thing in some respects that we had to do that because, attribution is never accurate. Even prior to iOS 14, it wasn't the true story. What you were seeing in platform wasn't necessarily the true story. So I think that was probably the biggest shift.
Yeah. Also, some interests have come back too. Like they took away the income interest. You could target people based off their income levels. They took it away they brought it back now. And so the thinking here is that it's not using people's, it's not using people's identifiable information, but it's more so using AI to try and triangulate who are the types of like groupings of people that may have higher income over others. It's probably the exact same thing.
Yeah, just same thing, different shit. They're just
it is, but like now they're abiding by Apple's policy.
Exactly. That's exactly what it is because it's always about
brought it back, right? So like I think, guys, how many times have we seen phases over the marketing over the years? Like it used to be all about the offer, then it went all about the media buying, now it's all about the product offer and creative. Like we're just going through these perpetual cycles, and it used to be all about the media buying, then it wasn't, now it is, and so it's like, again.
So this might be a good place to land us to the pointy end of things. Where does that place us in terms of the approach that we take? Just in general here as a baseline for Right Hook, that might be a good place to kick us off here.
I think in terms of media buying, it's really understanding the fundamentals of media buying, not necessarily fundamentals of marketing. And I guess the funny thing is like there is people preaching certain methodologies and certain approaches, and all camps are probably having success, which kind of points to the fact that there are different ways to achieve great results. There's not one specific way, and it's not even just per account. Just a general approach and general methodology, you can have success with different approaches. I think the key thing, and there are actually, at the moment, there's a huge period of change on Meta in terms of its products. Like Advantage Plus shopping campaigns themselves are changing almost weekly. Like, there's probably about 4 different versions of Advantage Plus shopping campaigns in our ad accounts, in our agency ad accounts right now, because they're testing so many different things in terms of existing budget cap, multiple ad sets within inside an Advantage Plus shopping campaign. So I guess the thing as a media buyer now is you have to latch onto some sort of set of fundamental principles, because there are so many changes and there will be changes in the future. And so if you are someone who just relies on listening to other people to get your tactics, you're always just going to be chasing what other people are doing and spinning your wheels and trying to figure out, now you enter a zone where there's so many people with different opinions and you're like, which of these opinions do I trust and which of these opinions do I follow? But realistically, most of them are still based on a set of fundamental principles around and I think even Meta is trying to push people in the direction, which is the reason the Advantage Plus shopping campaign, from my perspective, is because they want people to go broad, and they want placement liquidity, and they want signal. And the reason they want that is because they want signal, because that's going to help Meta deliver the best results is signal. So by introducing Advantage Plus shopping campaigns, it's like a nudge to people to say, hey, use this cool product, but really it's just broad targeting with all placements. To most, they call it, it's got some special AI apparently. It's a bit of a black box, but what Meta's doing is saying hey, we want you to go broad, use all placements, and don't have multiple campaigns. You just need this one campaign so that we can get as much signal going through it as possible. One ad set. So that's effectively what our setup is generally like anyway. We want to try and get as much signal going through each ad set as possible, because more signal equals more stability, not necessarily better results. Better results up to a point, but it equals more stability. So I guess that's one of our fundamental principles, is consolidate to get signal. And so, yeah, I think the pointy end is having a set number of principles, creative test, make sure you've got a regular cadence in terms of your creative testing, make sure you've got creative diversity, some simple principles, and then it really does fall back on the other things that outside the ad account, like offer, positioning, creative, all those sort of things.
Luke, so what are some benefits, additional benefits to consolidating your media buying down?
Yeah, so there's the high level thing that's kind of part of our principle is it's to reduce an over-reliance on media buying tactics when you could be spending that time doing something that is more higher leverage, which is working on your creative, working on your angles, working on your landing page. So part of it is enforcing some sort of constraint on yourself to be if I need to improve performance, do I focus on launching a couple more campaigns with different targeting and manual bidding and all sorts of stuff to try and improve performance, or do I spend that time and energy and allocate it to something which is actually more high leverage, investing in creative research, creative strategy, working on landing pages, working on my offer, working on my positioning. So it's part of it is about putting a human constraint on ourselves to focus on the thing which is most likely to have the biggest impact.
That's why we're rolling out the 40-second timer whenever Right Hook staff log into Business Manager, right?
Yeah.
When's that rolling out? Q4? This 40 seconds.
Oh my god.
Oh man. Yeah.
Heart attack.
There's a lot to unpack of what you talked about just then. I think the confusing element of going over the internet and looking for getting exposed to all these tactics and all these opinions of methodologies. I completely understand why that is the case, mainly because of the fact that if you had to be a content creator or a personal brand talking about fundamentals, it'll be the exact same post every day for 300 days a year. Right. Just be whereas the tactics, it's always fresh. It's always new. It's magazine stuff. It's magazine selling 101, 12 ways to get bigger biceps. and then you just rotate through all the body parts, and then by the time you're back in August, you're back at like forearms, or like that type of thing.
Yeah.
And the only 3 workouts you need versus the 1 workout you need versus the 1 exercise, all that. So I get that part. The other thing is, I think we might have, because this is our day-to-day, glossed over a few things that for the less initiated we might lose them a little bit. So maybe a good place to start is when we say consolidate, what are we consolidating exactly? Like, what does that even mean? Does that mean take every single thing across every single SKU and shove it into just one campaign? So, if we can unpack that a little bit more for the uninitiated, that might be helpful.
Yeah, I'd love to hear from Anthony on this, but from my perspective, it's not about sticking everything in one campaign necessarily. Like we normally would say, have one campaign per business objective. And so that might be a different campaign for a different angle, as long as or it could be a different campaign for a different product. If there's especially if there's a big difference in AOV from your product. So if your average order value, there's no point having one campaign where you've got advertising things that have an average order value of $500 and an average order value of $50 inside the same campaign. All the budget's going to go to the ads that are advertising the $50 product, because you're optimizing for highest volume normally, and that's going to be normally for that. So it's not about sticking everything in one campaign for sure. Consolidation is just about trying to get as much signal possible through each node in your system, which would be a campaign or ad set. And then as you scale, you probably need to expand out from just having 1 or 2 campaigns to manage your portfolio risk, for example, and to reach new pockets of people. And normally we'd say like the building blocks are exiting learning phase, or enough data to exit learning phase per node. That would be a starting point. Like don't add on an extra campaign if you're not already getting enough purchases or conversions through one ad set or campaign to exit learning phase. There's no point adding another campaign on until you've at least reached that milestone. You probably want to surpass that before you then add another node into your system.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I agree with the main benefit being one campaign per business objective. And then I think attribution plays a huge role into it as well. Like what Luke was talking about, like nodes. I refer to them as entry points. So the more kind of entry points for attribution that you have, the more scattered the data becomes, not only from Meta's perspective of optimizing within the context of a single ad set, but also from a reporting standpoint and making decisions. You could either have 10 purchases across 2 ad sets, or you could have 10 purchases across 10 ad sets. So from a reporting standpoint, it makes it so much easier to view the data when you limit the amount of entry points that you have for the attribution. And then it kind of turns the account more so into a system. And I feel when you're kind of measuring the performance of individual ad sets, the more you're kind of looking into individual ad sets or ads, the more you're kind of assessing performance just within the context of the account, and less so in relation to the impact it's having across the entire business. So it's you're comparing oftentimes people are oh, this ad set has a better CPA than this ad set, and let's scale into this ad set. But now you're basing that scaling decision off of what's happening in the account and not what's happening to the business. I feel consolidation just kind of promotes a natural progression outside of the ad account, where you can kind of zoom out and you start to think about performance, knowing you have just 1 or 2 structured campaigns that are consolidated, and then you're viewing that impact ideally across the entire business.
Could you give us an example? Because I feel it's very intuitive to us because we live and breathe this every day. But for example, I was on the call with a brand recently trying to explain a similar words of how we do things, and they didn't understand you run the ad account, but you don't look at the ad account and the ad sets and the ads, but then you look at overall. So let's take a fashion brand, because I know we do a lot of fashion. How would you do that tactically, on the day-to-day, if you're running an ad account? Because I know, Anthony, you have a fashion brand that's crushing right now. It's how do you do that? How do you look at the ad account, but still have the objective outside view of the business overall?
Yeah. for fashion accounts, obviously there's multiple SKUs and multiple collections. So that's where like one campaign per business objective comes into play, to where you can segment things by specific collection or specific category. But the day-to-day is relatively simple, to where, because everything is segmented ideally by category or product or collection, all of the attribution data, in theory, passing through that campaign should be tied to that specific product category or AOV. And then as you're managing the account day to day, because you only have like in that account, for example, we really only have like one primary campaign, because there's one collection of dresses, for example, that just crushes, is like 75% plus of the sales. So it's very easy to see a correlation between when we increase spend, like what happens to overall top line. And when you have like multiple individual ad budgets, if you are bumping up like an ABO campaign and you have like 5 ad sets in there, if you bump up one ad set by like $50 to $100, like I can't even imagine where you'd start to try and measure the incrementality that's being generated from that increase in $50 on your one ad set budget, when you have like other campaigns running in Meta, you have Google, you have email, organic, affiliates. So like with the consolidation, because everything is so condensed and focused into a few campaigns, when we make like a 20% raise, that might be like $500 or $600, and then seeing a $500 to $600 dollar increase on the budget for one campaign on Meta becomes way easier to measure, like what that impact is on the top line. Yeah. Hope that makes sense.
When you say that, so I know sometimes there's a use case, because you mentioned early on, like sometimes there's a use case consolidating the ad account, but also consolidating down the product focus in the ad account, because I know we've had some successes there. I'd love to hear you guys' thoughts on how do you know it's time to even consolidate down the product focuses in our advertising?
I think it comes down to like I think most people would call this like a hero offer. Like what is the product that people know you for and shop with you for? Obviously, like the more like products that you sell and the more SKUs that you have, the more complex that question becomes. But if you're just like a standard e-com brand, let's say like non-fashion, and you have maybe like 10 to 20 SKUs, even within fashion though, I still think this happens. You'll usually have like some hero like SKU or category that's driving up the majority of the sales. And like the question that I always ask is like, if I could not sell a specific product or collection on the site, or if I had to just pause it entirely or remove it from the website, which one would kill the business like over the next week or something? And that's usually the product that I would say is the most viable for paid ads. I think you also have to factor in like margins and LTV as well. But that's generally where I would start. Like what product or category has the highest impact on the business, from like a margin perspective or an LTV perspective, and then focus your ad dollars on that.
I'm so glad Anthony gave that answer instead of it depends, because that could have easily been an it depends question answer. But that was solid. That was super solid. I think being able to even pass through that filter, that heuristic of like which of these, if just we killed, would kill us, right? That's a really good place to start for sure. How does that look like we're talking about cleaning up ad accounts by way of consolidation so that we actually work off of a system. Can you show us something that is, like in the weeds, you're on the front lines, what does that actually look like? And what does that do? How is it actually beneficial? Because I think, there are still so many conversations around the approach being like at the ad set level and looking at it as just a collection of ad sets within one ad account, right? As opposed to trying to build something where there is a system of components that all kind of work together. So would love to see that. Would love to see that on the ground stuff that you put together.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me share my screen. Okay, so this is an example of an account that is non-consolidated. Or I guess another way I can phrase this is I would say this is how most founder-run ad accounts usually look like, because there's like so much on D2C Twitter about ad accounts, like cost caps versus bid caps versus highest volume. Like we're not even getting into like the actual account setups. It's just like the one freaking setting, like on the very first page of the campaign creation that people are still arguing over. But in this account, it's like, and I feel like a lot of ad accounts or people running ad accounts can resonate with this, where you have multiple things going. And the old school way of media buying, I would say, is like find the best cost per purchase, find the highest return on ad spend, and just dump the budget there. And then you'd kill off your kind of losing ad sets, like these ones here at the bottom. Like you'd kill those and you try to pump money into that lowest CPA and highest ROAS. But the problem with this setup, again, comes back to like two things. The first thing is just the attribution. So like attribution is already, in my opinion, kind of like an inherently flawed concept. And it's only getting worse, and it's going to continue getting worse. And when you have like this multiple campaign, multiple ad set setup, so much of your decision making is predicated on trusting what Meta's telling you in the account to be true. And that can be a very slippery slope. And then the second part of that
is funny about that. Depending on the time of the year is when how much people actually trust Meta. Like the performance is good. Oh, trust Meta. When it sucks, Meta's to blame. So it's like, you can't be true one week and then not true the next week. Like either you trust it or you don't.
Exactly. And I always just like, I'm just trying to think like 4 to 5 years out. Do I think attribution is going to get better or is it going to get worse? I think it's going to get worse. So I'm better off like planning my approach to the account, like, and thinking that over time, I'm going to have even less data and less signal in my account. And then the second part to this campaign kind of structure that makes it problematic is like when you're going into the account and you're checking it and you're having to make that decision of, okay, how do I scale? Now you already have like 10 different entry points for the attribution. Now you have 10 different budgets to decide between on where you should increase. So like you could increase this ad set here by $100, but then how are you going to measure that performance? Are you going to be able to measure that and like incrementality in the top line revenue of the brand? Like probably not. Like $100 increase is going to be almost impossible to measure like what that impact is on the business. And then second thing, like I don't think anyone wants to scale their account by like $50 a day with like each individual ad budget. And so some context for this account is that historically they had a really tough time increasing spend and unlocking scale. So much so that the actual owner of the brand basically told me like, oh, we can't like scale past a certain amount. Every May or like throughout the summer where we usually do this revenue, we don't do more than that. And so this was the original setup with all these different ad budgets. And then this is what the account looks like last May. So we went from like 10 active campaigns. And then throughout May, we had 4 active campaigns at once. One kind of primary evergreen campaign. So one campaign per business objective, just pushing our top selling evergreen collection. We had that second campaign, which is a catalog campaign. And then 2 additional campaigns, which were both just for promotional events like Mother's Day. And I honestly forgot the other one. But this was the setup. And what makes this so easy to scale and what makes scaling so easy with this setup is that when we come in to check the account, if we want to scale, we just increase the budget on the evergreen campaign. We don't have to like pit our ad sets against one another and say like, this ad set sucks and this one's good and let's only raise this one and kill this one. It's like, we have one campaign that's performing and hitting our KPI, increase the budget. And like the decision making becomes so like seamless and so kind of instinctual. And then again, to my other point, which is like, you only have 3 to 4 entry points really for the attribution. And so now you're feeding as much signal and as much data back into Meta as possible. How that impacts performance is a little bit difficult to quantify, but I think most would agree that the more data you can get into a single ad set, the better and more consistent the performance.
So when you were scaling this, Anthony, for example, because we've been talking about attribution and probably dancing around that sometimes what you see in the ad account isn't always reflective positively or negatively in the overall business. You know, there may be instances where the campaigns are performing better than it looks like. Maybe instances where it's performing worse than it looks like inside the Meta ad account. So I guess what kind of heuristics are you using for this brand? Because I know how much you've been scaling them to make those kind of decisions. I don't need to know every detail, but specifically, what are the things you're looking at and how are you making a decision that if things are good in the ad account versus top line?
Yeah, I think like it's a constant, you really have to like view both like constantly, and you kind of have to coordinate what you're seeing in the ad account with what's being reflected like on the business. But the main thing I'm generally looking for is like, if I increase my overall like Facebook spend, like not just like specific campaigns, but if I increase the spend of my Facebook channel, what impact will that have on top line? Like ideally, I'm looking for some type of correlation. Like if I spend more on this channel, I get more revenue out of the business. I think, might be a hot take, but I think that's truly like one of few reliable ways to assess the impact of the Facebook ads channel is seeing like, if you're putting in more, are you getting out more? And like, you want to be able to see that across all channels as well. So like for days when, let's say like our CPA just tanks to like a 200 or something, or return on ad spend drops like a 1, before I like panic push and start freaking out, and like, because Facebook's telling me performance in the account sucks, like what's happening on search? Like, did my Performance Max campaign suddenly pick up a ton of attribution and revenue? Or like, what's happening to the brand campaign? Or how many email signups did we get? Why is like email campaign revenue like up 32%? So like, you always have to constantly be, and I think most media buyers should always be constantly checking like how Facebook performance, regardless of what the account CPA is telling you, how that's impacting your other channels, and then ultimately like your ultimate end goal, which is to drive more revenue and growth. Let's see if I have this as well. So I did want to, if you don't mind, I would love to share this tab as well to kind of demonstrate what I was talking about earlier, where they had this account had troubles cracking scale. And the owner literally telling me that they cannot spend more, that they can't scale up. And so you can kind of see like from August to February, because this is more of a summer focused brand. This was naturally their slow season. But even like in the previous summer, they just were not able to crack over 100K in revenue. And then here's when we really took over and implemented account consolidation, simplifying everything down, focusing on pushing our best collection with our hero products, and minimizing as many entry points for the attribution as possible. And with that methodology, managing the account really became as simple as, if performance is good, if we're hitting our CPA targets, raise the budget. And that made scaling this account so seamless. Because again, we're kind of like zooming out of the ad account, and we're not having to account for like a million different ad budgets. It's literally just like, if Facebook is performing well and it's having a good impact, scale the campaign. And that was the decision-making process.
Can you hear that, guys? Can you hear the sound of all of the armchair experts yelling at the online store conversion rate metric right now? What are you guys doing? You guys are right. I can hear them. They're kind of loud. It's so interesting to hear you. And I love the way that you phrased the thinking model, the logical thinking through of assessing performance in a non-isolated type of a way, right? To then be able to look at it only not necessarily, or rather not exclusively at the per channel level, which I think a lot of media buyers are incentivized to do because of the fact that they're usually placed on a per channel level. That's number one. But then also number two, now that you're sharing this screen, that the flow through of that thinking model comes here as well, to then go, well, what could be the next key constraint or next area that we can be looking at to then be able to start working on, to start even increasing that top line, and hopefully for it to flow through to the bottom line as well, right? So, I mean, to be frank, like, I'm excited to see what happens when that online store conversion rate, because it's a $200 AOV. It's not exactly like a $2,000 one or like a $500 one. Like, when that does work gets put in there, if that climbs to like a 1 point something or a 2 point something, that's going to be kind of nutty.
Yeah, but I think it's interesting here too, is like, that's the right answer for everything is it always depends. For example, people always preach your conversion rate on your store must be at 1% to be profitable. Your ads must be getting at least a 1% click-through rate to scale, which isn't always true, right? So this brand is actually quite profitable. That's why they're scaling. But there's other factors like their repeat purchase rate, for example, is really good, right? So what that means is they can be more aggressive, and Anthony can be way more aggressive in acquiring customers because holy crap, it's a money printing machine. 30% of people are going to come back. So like, scale to the freaking moon as long as that ratio holds up. So that's where, I mean, I would take these stats every day of the week. But again, like, that's why it does depend. And Anthony appropriately said that Meta may be saying one thing, it may not look so good on Meta, but what are the other entry points? Google, this brand's running Google. Email, they're running email. They also have wholesale. Is the tide rising in other areas because Meta is pumping so hard? And how many times have we seen a brand where they shut down Meta and the tide lowered everywhere else? Why? Because that demand generation wasn't there. And so that's why, for example, I like to think about True Classic in this example, where I'll never forget, someone was interviewing him and asking him, hey, how much money are you spending on YouTube? He's like, oh, I'm spending like $2-3 million a month. He's like, holy crap, like what's your reported return? He's like, that's a 0.1 ROAS. I thought, holy crap, 0.1. And he was asked, why are you still running on YouTube? It's a 0.1 ROAS. He said, because one of the number one choices people give in our post-purchase survey of how they first heard about us was YouTube. So that's a really great example that they see the impact it has, even though it looks terrible. They know it's rising the tide somewhere else.
Yeah, that's something that I am very hand on heart proud of whenever I go to like Meta events or conferences and stuff like that. The fact that we are not crazy-eyed, overly laser focused and over-indexed on pure play direct response only, where, you know, like it's because with some marketers or some performance marketers, it's really like difficult to have a conversation with them about this, because anything upper funnel for them, just like, that's a waste of time. Like, what are you doing? If an ad doesn't make money, kill it. Like, I'm that kind of guy. I'm like, bro, what's going on right now? I don't know how to have a conversation with you. So, right, like, so they're the anti it depends.
Using what D said, Anthony, if let's say this brand said, you must have, I don't know what the return is, but in the platform, you must have a 4x return before you spend more money. Would you have been able to scale at all if they had that kind of cap on you?
Well, the first thing I would ask them is why. And often that question, that single word alone, can often just flatten that requirement for a specific return. But if they were to say, we need a 4 return on ad spend in Meta, to answer your question, no, we would not have been able to scale spend. We would have had to pull back in some instances, because there were days throughout the month, and even like 2 to 3 day stretches, where the Facebook ROAS would dip pretty substantially And so in that case, like if we were just responding to our meta in-platform return on ad spend, the natural, or I would say the more like old school way of thinking would be like, kill the losers, decrease the budget, and then wait for the in-platform metrics to look good and then increase the spend back up. But in so doing, you potentially lost out, that's like a multi-day process. You may have just lost out on like 3 to 7 days worth of scaling because you pulled back when meta looked bad, but things were still working. So, to answer your question, we would have had to pull back, but that obviously would have been the wrong decision, looking in hindsight at the results.
I'm always concerned when a target is a round number, like 3x, 4x, like that shows, that's always like a bit of a red flag because like, unless you've rounded up like from like 3.99 or something, like your target should have some decimal places, I would suggest, because a round number suggests it's not based on science, it's based on like, I don't know, some sort of thumb in the air estimate. Do you know what I mean? Like,
oh yeah,
you
for
work
sure.
out the
And
actual economics.
And if it's set by a true marketer, it'd be 3.97 because it's always the 9.
Yeah.
Your ROAS needs to be 397, and then a slash through that 497. Hey Anthony, before we move on from your show and tell, I think the home run slide would be because all those changes look nice and good, and then the to be able to bring that. Help them break their revenue plateau, which they believed was a like actual physics. They actually thought that was like a physical ceiling that was there. The home run slide, I think, would be a very interesting one to for us to talk through as well.
Yeah, for sure. So this is just the year over year sales to show the growth from May of last year to May of this year. And then moving really quickly forward into this slide to show the results. So with this setup, we're basically able to, on the left is our in-platform CPA. So that only rose about 10%, about $7. So it did increase, but if you could, only stomach a 10% increase in your CPA, but generate a 46K increase in revenue and a 64% increase month on month. Like we went from 72K in platform to 120. And really like all that came down to was just having this simplified setup and making the decision making as simple as possible. So we could just come in and increase the budget as long as everything is working and we're hitting our targets. And this is way simpler, again, like to go back, but not to beat a dead horse, but it's so much simpler to increase the budget and to increase spend and to scale when you are working with the algorithm and consolidating and keeping everything like to as minimal attribution entry points as possible. So this was just the growth that we saw. And then again, like only a $7 increase in the CPA. So we're able to spend effectively like only at a $7 increase per conversion, but the difference in conversion value, I think, kind of speaks for itself.
Totally. And how do people like? What can someone who's trying to get themselves change their own situation in a similar that are in a similar situation right now, and they're trying to change it? Holy crap, that was word salad. If someone's in a similar situation and they're trying to change it for themselves, holy moly, it's too early in the morning for this. What can they do?
Yeah. So very simply, like chances are if you have multiple ad set budgets and you're running kind of a more traditional setup with ABO campaigns, like chances are you do have top performing ads in the account. So the first thing is just find your top performing ads, looking at your top spenders. So where have you spent the most money on? And then what ads are producing the best CPA? Once you find those, grab the post IDs. I put there, that's very important because if you don't grab the same post IDs, you're not going to have that same social proof. So all the comments, all the shares that you've spent potentially thousands, if not millions of dollars on, that won't get duplicated if you're not using the same post ID. So grab the post ID, then just create a CBO campaign, one ad set throw in all of your winning post IDs. And then going back to what we're talking about with one campaign per business objective, ideally you're segmenting the campaigns based on product category, product margins, or LTV. And that's one thing with account consolidation is Meta doesn't have the context about the business that you as the media buyer or the brand owner should. Like Meta doesn't know that this collection has a lower AOV, but produces a better LTV than this collection. And so that's on you as the media buyer or the brand owner to segment the campaigns so that you are working with Meta to drive performance. But that's the main lever of segmentation is either product category by margins or by LTV.
That's awesome.
I have a question, throw a wrench into this. So I was recently talking to a brand that's kind of in a conundrum. Performance isn't looking great. Meta reported CAC shows one thing. They have a third-party, first-party attribution tool that says something different. But then when you look at their blended CPA across the entire business, it says something different. And they're in this really weird like middle place. They don't know who to trust and what to trust because obviously they think, well, Meta should know, but that's off. This third-party attribution saying that they know everything and that's off. And then my blended CPA is saying something totally different. So like, what kind of advice would you give for brands that have that can't choose which method to follow?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
Oh, go
your
ahead.
Your blended CPA is reality, isn't it? That's based on hard numbers. Like that's your revenue and the amount you're spending. So that's got to be your North Star. Like those metrics that are based in just hard numbers, reality, there's no attribution involved here. So like that's got to be your North Star metric and you've got to work backwards from there. That's my initial thought. Anthony, I'll let you add to that.
Yeah, I was going to say.
One thing I want to say to throw a wrench is that they're advertising on Meta, Google, and they have a store on Amazon as well as their Shopify store. So things get kind of muddy with that second store on Amazon.
Yeah, I was going to say, like to Luke's point as well. I think if you're having trouble like assessing what the source of truth would be, like I would always suggest like working with the numbers that you can calculate without like attribution tools. So like blended CPA, that's something you can calculate like within Shopify without a Northbeam or a Triple Whale or without Meta. Because like to Luke's point, that's like the truth. That's the data that is yours and you don't need attribution tools for. If you're having trouble already deciding between Meta's attribution and your blended CPA number, I don't think the solution is another attribution tool. Because you're kind of you're not really fixing the main problem. So get a grasp of what your true kind of metrics are that you can figure out without any attribution tools like your blended CPA, and then use that as the North Star because that's not being inflated or impacted by whether you're using like 7-day click, 1-day view, or 1-day click. Like that, those are just real numbers based on your customers, your orders, and your revenue.
Post-purchase survey is going to help you here as well. I think that is, whether or not you could debate whether or not it's reality, but if you ask people who are buying, where did you first hear about us? How long did it take you to make that decision? Where did you last hear about us? Those sort of questions that can help you triangulate as well, I think, or you can get a lot of insights from that because you're literally hearing from the people that are buying from you, whether or not they answer the survey. You get enough percentage of responses or number of responses for it to be significant, and whether or not you can trust that people are going to give you the right answer. But I think that's another way to add an extra layer of data that is actually somewhat based in reality. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. And that point right there, or that conversation that you had, Ray, I think is, and that could be like a whole episode on itself when it comes to.
We try and solve attribution.
Yeah, where we actually solve it. What do you mean try and solve it? Where we actually solve it once and for all. The thing that like all these people that spend millions of dollars in the MarTech and the ad tech world, we can solve it once and for all. We reveal our tool, Q4, also with the 40-second timer tool. Download on Chrome. But it seems like, I don't know, a lot of the time whenever I have these conversations, it seems like it's just a battle for the illusion of control under the guise of wiser decision making around budget allocate. You know, like it's all there are a bunch of professional words and there's jargon and stuff like that, but really it's this illusion of control where there may not be any. What I mean by that is isolationist thinking on a per channel basis and hoping for attribution, direct one-to-one attribution that way to find causality makes it a really murky conversation, especially in the context of Ray's story earlier, where True Classic made a decision to allocate spend to a channel that is showing, like, you know, the numbers that are shown to them, at least, shows that it's a 0.1 return, right, Ray?
Yes.
Yeah, like 0.1 return, right? And to, because a lot of the time people say show your data and let the data speak for itself. But at the end of the day, you can string a narrative through data as well. Like you can actually overlay that over numbers, right? There is a level of subjectivity that can come with supposedly objective numbers as well. So stay tuned for that episode where we finally solve it once and for all. Please let's not go and run that episode. It'd just be a whole bunch of nothing, a whole bunch of arguing and methodologies that it's just like, I don't know. Attribution sometimes feels to me like the horoscope. Watch me get canceled by all the horoscope people, but there's validity. There's a lot of, don't get me wrong, there's a lot of validity in attribution, but sometimes people take it to this whole other stratosphere that I just can't follow along anymore. We had a whole conversation around that last time I was in Melbourne at the Meta event over lunch, and I'm like, guys, we're really talking about this over lunch. Like, can we just sip on our beers, please? But it is a hot button topic for sure. As we start to land the plane, as we come towards time, this might be a burning question that, again, just for the uninitiated, if you have a consolidated campaign, and that is where most of your you're putting most of your winners in. How do you introduce new concepts, new creative, new stuff in? Do you put it into that campaign? What does that do? What does the algorithm do in terms of allocating spend if all that stuff is in there? How does that work? I love Luke's. You can't even help yourself. You suck at poker, don't you?
There's a couple of different approaches.
Yes, let's go.
Yeah, I don't know if we've got enough time.
Am I landing the plane here, or am I actually getting another plane in flight?
You're getting more complicated. You open Pandora's box.
You're about to take it off to like Argumentville.
Well, good enough.
There's a couple of different approaches. Yeah, I don't know if we've got. I mean, you can. We have two testing methodologies. There is the one campaign scale and test methodology, which is where you introduce your. I mean, okay, let's take a step back. To introduce new creative, we want a batch test. So a batch test is where we take a concept or an angle with normally multiple variations. So depending on your approach, either 3 variations. So you may take a traditional A/B testing approach and just have maybe 3 variations on it. Just test one element. So we just want to test maybe the creative against the same headline and the same copy. That would be my approach anyway. And so that's a batch test, and we want to run it and see how it performs against either a control or our target, whatever KPIs that we want to set for our batch test. So there's a couple of different ways to approach batch testing. You can either introduce a batch test into your existing scaling campaign as a separate ad set and let it battle it out, assuming this is a CBO, let it battle out against your winners ad set, which already has your winning ads in it. Or you can run a separate ABO testing campaign and test those ad sets, do those batch testing in isolation in a separate campaign, in a separate ABO campaign, allocate a certain amount of budget to each batch test, and then move the winners from that campaign into your main scaling campaign. So there's 2 approaches that you can take. Like I said, I don't know if we've got the time to argue about it. I will say that the one campaign scale and test methodology tends to involve DCTs, which have now been made defunct by Meta. I did shed a tear. So
someone's in trouble because their whole business is relying on that.
Yeah, well, that's just. I think DCTs were always a bit of a gimmick myself personally, in terms of using that as a testing methodology. But that's a different story. But yeah, there's two approaches to testing that we would take.
I can't wait. I am hell bent now on making that episode happen. Just like Royal Rumble style, throw down. Get to the point where like people are calling their mother's names and just like.
There's benefits, and I think there's pros and cons to both approach.
Sure, with anything, right?
There's actually no perfect testing methodology. I don't think there's no perfect way to test.
Well, the cost cap bros would say that is the perfect, because if it doesn't spend, it means it sucked to begin with.
Yeah. There's an assumption. There's an assumption baked into that, though, isn't there?
Yeah, that Meta knows more than you, and that how trustworthy is Meta from day to day, right?
Yeah, I guess the key thing between the one campaign scale and test methodology is you're using spend as an indicator of whether or not that ad is a winner, or that batch test is a winner. And with the ABO testing methodology, you're not using spend as an indicator per se. You are running a certain amount of spend and making a judgment based on the metrics after that amount of spend. So those are the key differences between those two methodologies. And I guess the benefit of having spend is you are actually able to get some data and some insights. So from an iterative approach, I think that's where the ABO testing methodology is helpful, because if you don't get any spend, you get no data, so there are no learnings. So the learning is quite binary. The learning is this wasn't a good ad or a good concept, or this was. And whereas when you do ABO testing, you have there's a scale of how good this ad was. You know what I mean?
Yeah, there's a bit more texture besides good, suck. Yeah. Okay, we're definitely making that episode happen. Hopefully, actually do us a favor in the comments. If you want to see that throwdown happen, please let us know. That gives me the ammunition and the firepower to kind of pull more people into this, into that episode, to be able to make it happen. Do it in the comments, please. Okay. For this convo, after what we've had so far, if you had one key takeaway for whoever is watching this and lasted this long, all four of them, what do you have for them when they next open up their unlock their phone and go to the D2C Twitter sphere? If you have one piece of advice for them to kind of guide them along their way, what would it be? Anthony, we can start with you, and then we can go over to Luke, and then Ray.
Yeah, I think, as media buyers, I think all of us are very numbers oriented, and we always want to have control and always want to have answers to what's going on inside of the account. But I would say the main takeaway, and I think what account consolidation, the kind of philosophy it's kind of built on, is to keep the main thing the main thing. When you're managing an account, what does the client want, or what do you want as the marketer? Usually you don't want more purchases on your Meta account. You either want more top line revenue growth, you want more profit. And so your decisions in the account should feed from that ultimate end goal and keeping the main thing the main thing. And if you ever feel like you're kind of spinning in circles and you're having ad sets battle each other for attribution, or you're kind of too focused in on the ad account, I would say just always remember to keep the main thing the main thing. What is the ultimate end goal you're trying to get out of this account? And then just make that the priority and just focus on trying to achieve that, as opposed to trying to make the Meta ad account look better or worse based on attribution.
Love that. Luke?
Oh, I think I'd say try and spend a little less time on Twitter, potentially. That would be my advice. And, most people, as a media buyer, it's natural. I've been media buying for over a decade now, and I've always enjoyed the shiny object part of it, the tactical element of it, but I think the best thing for you to do is to try and understand the fundamentals, like the things that the first principles, potentially the things that aren't really going to change, and the things that the tactics are actually built up on top of. So that would be the first thing. And yeah, like people who preach a certain dogma are more than likely trying to sell you something, and they are incentivized to either come up with fancy ways to make their dogma seem appealing, and like I think a big part of the argument is to deposition other people. Like some people have come into this industry very strongly in a very depositioning way, and are taking advantage of the fact that people want things to be easy. Do you know what I mean? Like it's natural. Like media buying, even though it's dead, is hard. I think in some respects, like it does require skill. And so if you can come in and say, "Hey, I've got this really easy way, and everyone else's methodology sucks," and like you can appeal to the people that are kind of lost souls in the media buying world, then you're going to attract. It's a bit like, Andrew Tate picking up like the sort of the lost souls of, the disaffected youth. Do you know what I mean? There's
sounds like Lucifer, dude.
Well, there's like disaffected brand owners, disaffected media buyers. So if you can come in and deposition against them, you've got a strong chance of making people listen to you. And so yeah, I don't know. I sound fairly salty about it, but I think I've just been around too long, probably.
But it's marketers doing what marketers do, right? They're
exactly, yeah.
They're actually being marketers. Like,
yeah,
I think they're following the full playbook.
You don't have to be a dick. Do you know what I mean?
But that gets eyeballs. That's also the other thing. Like vanilla staying it safe. Like that's also marketers doing what marketers do. Ray, what's your piece of advice that you can leave people with for this one? It's been a big topic.
Anthony and Luke gave some really great ones. The one that I would say that's different is Luke brought up a really good point that I think we should take away from is always start at the first most base fundamental is like, what data do you know to be true? You know how much you're spending, you know how much you're making, like start there, because meta is not always right. Attribution tools aren't always right. Like start there. And as soon as Luke said that, it made me think of the affiliate friends that we have. That's how they make all their decisions on, right? Because it's a very clean walled garden. How much did I spend? How many sales did I get? And I optimize based off that and like only a couple metrics. And it's really interesting that we come full circle. Like, this is like 15 years ago advertising now to where those are the only things you had to track. And so I think that's quite interesting. It's like start there and then build your foundation on what you know to be true versus trying to chase shiny object, this tool, that tool, things like that.
For sure. It's as you guys were talking about your takeaways, the mental image that I had are those people that go to the gym and like they buy like all the supplements and they're counting their macros and they've got the wrist guard and the waist belt and all that, and then they show up at the gym and they don't lift hard at all. I'm like, you do the lifting hard part, you wouldn't have to do any of that other stuff at all. So some kind of analogous version of that was the picture that came to mind for me. And I think my takeaway from this after hearing you guys talk really kind of goes like this. As you guys were talking, in my mind, the person that I squarely had on was a brand founder who a lot of them find their way into this game, honing in a lot of brand founders are the ones that also run their performance marketing, especially in the early days, right? I really do think that they would be, if you're a brand founder, you'd be doing yourself such a bigger service and your business and giving it such a higher probability of growing if you stopped the D2C Twitter lurker free route and actually just like honed in on either joining some communities or talking to some smart people who have done it yourself, and then just copying what they're doing for long enough to see whether it sticks or not. Because D2C Twitter can pull you in any direction, probably 12 times per week. Every week, that's a lot of different directions to take, and you'll always be second guessing yourself because you're not sticking around for long enough for it to stick, right? So if you are a brand founder, I think that's the best advice I can give you, because being a brand owner, like a business owner myself, I know how shiny objects are everywhere, and you feel like they all work, because they all do. But if you don't pick, you're not sticking around long enough to know whether it does for you. So that's my key takeaway there. And on that note, let's figure out a way to get to that next episode where we can get hotter takes. I like the spicy stuff. It gets the views. And in the meantime, Anthony, Luke, Ray, thank you for today. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you in the comments section, and we'll see you next episode. Adios, everybody.
Thanks, guys.